Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. We are going to be taking a look at lesson 3, and the main focus of that is going to be our sector compass, and it's the beginning of our site analysis phase. And yeah, it should be an interesting meeting reviewing that. So what I think I'll do, we'll just we'll start with that. We'll take a look at the sector compass and show a few examples. And then I also have some questions. We're going to take a look at her base map. And yeah. So sounds good. Let us go to... That's interesting. I'm having little challenges with Zoom lately, so we'll just try again here. There we are. Oh, there we are. Okay. Maybe it's me that's having the challenges. All right. Okay, so yeah, if we take a look at lesson number 3, it's pretty straightforward, but we'll go through all that. And the first part is the site and regional challenges survey, and that is pretty easy. And if we take a look at the template file here, so we've done our base map and we have our client interview, and now we're just taking a look at some site challenges that might be present that you had noticed, and then sort of a bigger picture regional challenges. So yeah, this is pretty straightforward. If you look at the rubric for this, you'll see that you get 4 points allocated for the site and regional challenge, and then 10 points for the sector compass. So kind of gives you an idea of where to sort of split your energies. But this is pretty straightforward. We're just asking for some very general questions about both the site and the region. And of course, this is really the beginning of the site analysis, and it's a really important step in the design process. So even if you're going through this first part and thinking, well, how is this relevant? It may become a little bit more relevant to you as we go through here. So that is the first step. And then we get into our sector compass. So if we go back to that part of the assignment, you'll see that there's a bunch of instructions here, and I'm sure that most of you have looked at the content relating to this, but really what we're looking at is sort of outside factors or outside energies that influence the project site. And you may or may not have much control over those, but some you will. And we want to take a look at all the items that you identify and then sort of place an action on those. So we either want to enhance or amplify, we want to deflect, or we're just going to simply accept that sector. So an example of that might be, you have summer, you have a lot of exposure that you want to, say winter sun, you want to amplify, but perhaps in the summer, you want to deflect that. And certainly our homestead here has some sectors that are like that. We have a south facing portion of our house that gets very hot in the summer, but we welcome all that sunlight and energy in the winter. So that is certainly one example. We are going to take some take a look at some examples in the template file, and I can show you a few that we've done ourselves. But a good thing to do is going through and looking at this line by line just to make sure that you have everything that's being asked for. So typically, this is a nice little slide you can build on, and you just need to place your base map in the middle of this circle here, and then modify all of these different sectors based on your project site. So what are they? Well, with the legend here, it's pretty easy to see what they're after. But so we have water, we have fire. So with water, this is often a little bit of a confusing sector, and I probably every instructor might have a different take on this one, but for me, when I'm looking at water flows, I'm looking at water that's coming onto the project site from off of the property. I've seen that some people will put a water sector all the way around the property as it's shown here and just say that there's water hitting the roof. And while that is obviously true, I think it's probably a more valuable lesson to really try and identify things that might be coming in overland that are obvious. It could be obvious threats during the winter and perhaps, or even in the summer, but they could also be these huge resources that we want to tap into and try and make the most out of. So the same is true with coming off your roof. In a rural setting, you may have all the water just dumping on the ground from your rooftop. It may be going into a rock pit. It may be going into a roadside ditch. In an urban setting, it's more likely to go into a storm system. But either way, we can tap into that water. And we're going to get more into that as we get into lesson number 5. Fire is a biggie, especially if you are surrounded by forest, or you have forest on some of the boundaries of your project site. This is often not really a sector in an urban or city center. So just keep that in mind, because with these, identifying all these sectors is really going to help us structure our design as we're going forward. Because I know for ourselves, when we put together a sector compass for a project, that's something that we're going to reference back to during the project itself, just to make sure we haven't missed anything. And we also share this with our clients quite early in the design process, just to make sure we haven't missed anything that they see that's obvious. So the summer and winter sun, those are shown here, and you can see why having a north orientation with your base map is helpful, just in that it's very, very easy to set these. There could be pollution, wildlife, and visitors or prevailing wind. So Natalie, you've got a question there. You go ahead.
This is somewhat related. I'm looking at the summer and winter sunlight. And it's possible I've missed this. How, because it's summertime right now, is there a way that I can calculate the angle of the sun? Is there yeah, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you'd probably find that under the resources here, and here we are. SunCalc is something that I've used before. So we just put in your address. Well, I'll just place where I'm living right now, generally. And so you have this interface here. And all you do is you change the dates. So let us just pretend we're looking for that summer solstice. And right there, we're getting, well, this is the position of the sun currently. So we kind of ignore that. Let me just get my annotation. There we go. So this is the angle here that we want to replicate on our drawing. And it's actually pretty easy if you just even physically trace over that angle and apply it on top of your base map. You have roughly that angle. So the sun is coming up here in the morning and it's going down here at the end of the day. And then on the left here, we have our altitude and azimuth and all those angles that you were talking about. So this should be able to help you out. That is for summer. And then of course, if we want to go to winter, we just change the date there. And then we get a remarkable difference. So we just need to trace that angle. And that's essentially all I do with our sector maps, is just get this angle and then place it on the drawing. So if you're north up, boom, it's easy that we have this. Now, some of you have orientated your drawings a little different. So you just have to rotate this 90 degrees in one direction or the other, if that is the case. And again, you have some data here on the left when you have your sunrise and sunset. So it's a great little site. We use it with our work, and so you should find that really helpful. Does that answer your question, Natalie? Do you think that's covering it all off?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So that, let's go back to our sector compass. So those are examples of some sectors. Now, it's quite possible that you don't identify all of those within your project site. For myself, if I was doing a sector compass of my homestead right now, yeah, I'd probably be keeping quite a few of those. And the prevailing wind can be a little bit tricky. So you may inherently know, like where I live, there's a definite summer and winter prevailing wind. So most of the time we get wind off the water during the summer. And then during the winter, we'll often get a southwest or southeaster wind. So those are really important to note, because you may have, damaging winter winds that you want to plan for, right? And you may also want to plan for those summer prevailing winds for their cooling effect. So yeah, there's a number there, and there should be a couple of good examples here. So this is where I have a little challenge in that I do see a lot of people putting, I mean, it doesn't really matter to me, but I see a lot of people putting a water sector all the way around their property or their project site, and they're just indicating it's coming off of the roof. And that's not how I view this exercise, but does it matter? Not really. But I want to know where there could be some potential flood issues, or where there could be a resource coming into the property. So you may have a riparian area going through your property. And again, that would be one of those treasures we'd want to identify with this. The same with the fire sector. This is a small lot. There's barely any vegetation on it. And unless you're surrounded by a forest, it's unlikely, a potential house fire from a neighbor. I guess the trick I would have is, we want to try and design with these sectors in mind. So I don't know what you would do to protect against your neighbor having a house fire. Maybe you would avoid having any hedging along the boundary. But yeah, so I personally, I'm looking at wooded areas that could potentially create that challenge. But if you wish to again look at this with threats from a neighboring house and stuff, or cars on the road, I mean, that's totally your call. I don't think there's really a right or wrong. It's just, more preference. What information that you're going to find is valuable as you go forward. And then our summer and winter sun, that looks great. And pollution, unfortunately, that is pretty common. And then we have wildlife. So that's really important to put in, because that again is going to be typically amplify and deflect, right? You're going to amplify or want to amplify some elements, but you wouldn't want to, you'd hopefully want to deflect other browsing animals that are coming through. And visitors and view. So often there is a favorable view we want to maintain, or an unfavorable view you want to try and deflect. And again, the prevailing wind. So with the wind, you may have two, right? You may have a winter and a summer, or it may just be more sort of mono, like that image there. I'm just going to try and find the link I've got here for my wind. I don't think it's in the resource here. It's quite a good. There we are. I'll just I'll put this in the chat. Everybody's got it, and it's pretty a pretty interesting site. So this is historical wind information, and you can see it covers a lot of North and Central America. And if you zoom in, you may find something, close to your location. And if you click on that, you have all sorts of options here to look at wind at various times of the year. And it'll also give you the average speed. So that's a very important thing to look at. And it's fascinating because we're currently looking at other potential properties for the long term for us to move to. And we were looking at some properties in Eastern Canada. And it's quite an eye-opener when you go back east and then you start looking at wind speeds. They are quite significant, and these are averages. So if we look at December, we're getting about 20 knots on average, which is quite a bit. So okay, Natalie, you got another question for us?
By direction versus average speed by direction.
Sorry, I missed the first part of what you said.
Yeah, I wanted to know what the difference is between frequency by direction and average speed by direction.
Yeah.
I don't know what two things mean.
Yeah, well, this is just the direction and the prevailing direction that wind's coming from, right? So in this, it's in Sydney, Nova Scotia. If we were doing a sector map for this, we could pretty much say that is our prevailing winter wind direction, and the speed really doesn't play into the exercise we're doing, although you could make a note of it and you could say, well, it's going to be about 15 knots during the winter months, but so that's not vital. When you're closer to the water, that may be a little bit more vital, but yeah, it's the direction more than the speed that we're after. See here, and you probably find that there's a lot of things missing here, right? So, but you can get some averages, and you may have some really good info. Like if we look just at this map, we're getting an idea of that prevailing wind right now, right? So these vary quite a bit, but they're giving us a rough idea. So if we were in Tacoma, it looks like we're getting sort of southern.
Well, and what it looks like too is that it follows the water. So if you looked at the water paths and the direction they're flowing, it looks like the wind is going with the water.
Yeah, totally. And that is what we find. We're in this area here, so we're getting winds going up and down the strait. But the reality is when we're up in here, and we're getting winds predominantly in that direction. Sometimes this way, and then sometimes this way. So it varies a little bit in the summer, and then in the winter, we tend to get hammered in that direction. So it's good info to have, especially if you are close to the water and you need to either shelter your landscape a little bit or open it up for those cooling winds. But again, that's a good resource you might want to keep in your bookmarks. And again, it covers North and Central America. We don't go outside of that. All right, where are we? Okay, we were looking at an example here. Yeah, so I think we covered that off. So is there any questions at all about the sector map? I mean, there may be a question about its purpose. One of the things oh, go ahead.
Sorry, are there any topics that are not listed here that might that have popped up on other people's mapping compass?
I think these are the primaries. I'm trying to think of what, because we're looking, even if we look at things like wildlife as a macro, when we start looking specifically, because where I live, we have a wildlife sector all around us, and that's great, and we want that. But we have bear and deer visitation that we'd rather deflect, and we've done so successfully for about 26 years until the last couple of years. And this year we had a bear come over our fence line and crushed it pretty good, and then the deer followed, and we've got right now we have, I think it's 3 female deer and 6 babies. So all these deer jumped our fence and had their young in here, and it's been rather catastrophic to our garden, but there's not a lot we can do to get them out of here. Last year we had a deer jump in, and we saw it, and it took us about a day, and we got the deer out one of our gates. And then the next morning, my neighbor called me and said, "Hey, you got a dead deer in your ditch." And we went out, and there was a big puncture mark in the neck, and looked like a cougar had got it, and maybe got disturbed. Then a few hours later, a fawn came out of the woods, and was orphaned, right? So we felt bad that we had no idea that there was a young one in here. We had to take the little one down to a wildlife rescue sanctuary, and hopefully things worked out for the fawn. But this year it's fawn galorium, and our landscape's not set up for deer resistance because we've never had to worry about it. So I would say, 90% of our annual vegetables are done, and yeah, it's going to be a very interesting winter.
I live in near Silverton, Oregon, and most towns you can't hunt in city limits, and they have lots of deer roaming through there. And there are several friends of mine who want me to practice some permaculture designs, and so I'm hoping that I can learn some really good wildlife deterrence for like town areas. Like, how do you keep the deer out of your small space?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and we when we first arrived here 28 years ago, we fully fenced our property. So 5 acres. We put 6.5-foot deer fence on the whole perimeter, and we had gates, upper and lower gate, and it worked well. It's worked really well. But we've had development in our area, and the wildlife used to have a lot of places to go, and they clear cut, probably 60 acres just below us, and there's just so much going on that there's not the safe areas for the wildlife anymore. So we're finding we're almost being caught in the middle, and we're getting a lot of pressure. So going forward next year, we're planning to do an internal fence. So that's one of our challenges. We have this perimeter deer fence, but we can't control what goes on the other side of it. So if we have any trees fall on it, which has happened, and in the fence in the forest area, it's T-posts and wire, and as soon as your T-post gets bent over, you're redoing at least part of your fencing. And we can't, the access has changed. We used to be able to get a little excavator in there, and now it's a situation where I don't want to go in and create a lot of disturbance, because the neighbors logged off an acre of trees beside us, and it's already had a negative impact on our forest. So I don't, yeah, so we're just going to shrink and put up some fencing around, probably a quarter or half acre of annual garden, and then that'll be our food garden. We know it's safe, and we don't have to and the rest of it, well, we'll have to modify, because I do have a lot of like all of our gooseberries that were just coming into being ripe, they got stripped. Our currants, elderberries, new mulberries that I have in, yeah, but it's the way it is, and I certainly couldn't have gone the other way based on last year. So it's very interesting, but there are some really interesting ways to protect a property from deer. I've seen saw one lady, I think it was in the US, and it was a video I saw, and she had some electrified wire, just single strand, and she would go along every 100 foot, 200 foot, she would put some foil. So she'd get a strip of foil, tin foil, and wrap it over so it would be in contact with the wire, and then she'd put a little bit of nut butter on the end of the foil. And sure enough, deer come up to it, lick it, and 10,000 volts, they're never coming back, right? Yeah, that would be very painful.
That's awesome.
But it worked for her.
Well, and it doesn't kill them. They
No.
just don't want to come back.
Yeah. There's bone broth. No, not bone broth. Oh gosh. You take bones and you just, oh gosh, I'll have to get that info.
Meal?
Bone witch?
bone meal, like the powder.
No, it's not bone meal. It's along that line where you take some old bones and you sort of cook it down. You make a paste, probably from the marrow, and then you apply this paste to trees, and apparently that is a deterrent. But I've discovered that with like fawns, like baby deer, they have no taste buds and they'll eat anything. They're eating tomatoes and cucumbers and squash and nightshade plants, things that aren't healthy, you wouldn't think are healthy. So the adults are a little easier to work around, but the young ones are, yeah, very interesting. So, but yeah,
Maybe.
go
So
ahead.
similar to like with the winter and the summer sun, could you do that with wildlife? Because with wildlife, if you have predators, that's a pretty big thing that may be surrounding your whole property, whereas
Mhm.
the wildlife that you want to amplify, butterflies, birds, or whatnot, like can you separate them? Like if some of these sectors don't really apply, like we don't have the fire one,
Right.
can you detail them out where you take similar like the sun or the winds, like where you have a very different wind in the summer or the winter, and you just make two?
Yeah, you could. You can do whatever you wish. If I was doing a wildlife sector map and I was concerned with deterring or deflecting, I would have it in specific spots. Whereas you're quite right, the wildlife comes in from all angles, and that's great. We have tons of wildlife on our property. It's just the odd one, the deer and the bear. Well, the bear don't bother us at all. It's just that they damage our fence. The deer, however, they are very, very hard. So yeah, you can separate them if you wish. I haven't seen anyone do that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. This is really a valuable sort of feedback drawing for yourself and your client, right? So you can show them, this is what I see. Are you on the same page? And modify it. Sometimes, well, I'll show you an example here of one that we did, because sometimes you won't have as many sectors. It really does depend. Let's see here. Well, you'll love this one too, because it's not north up. As you can see, it's on an angle. But here we just have, this is an urban property. So we have wildlife and privacy, and we do have a flood sector, and a view sector, and then the summer and winter. So there's definitely not as many. I can show you another one here. So it is very specific. Go. And this is another one. This is north up. So summer and winter at the bottom. We have prevailing wind. We have a view corridor, and definitely had a flood sector, which turned out to be quite accurate. We did have a flood. We actually on this job, which we'll undoubtedly look at some images of this through the course, but we ended up, there was an existing retaining wall here, which we replaced. And when we were replacing it, we knew we were going to have water heading in this direction. And unfortunately, our mason at the time, one of his workers made a little error, and with the drainage behind a retaining wall. So it ended up flooding this area here during the winter months. So right when we were at a Christmas break, I got a call, oh, we got all this water, and there was no issue. We got it all fixed up, but he had to rip the wall down and redo it to get at the drainage. So that was wasn't great for him, but these things happen. But we had identified that, and that was, it came to it came to be. There's no doubt of that. There's a fire sector, so this is this is a city lot, and you'd say, well, why do you have fire? Well, it was surrounded by forest here, and the good thing is it was at the bottom of a slope. So if it was more uphill, then it becomes a little bit more of a concern, because fire inherently is going to go uphill where it likes to, not always, of course, but so yeah, this is another example for you. I don't know why I have, oh, that's the other one there. And then I have some design layers here that we'll go through these as we go through the course, just to show you what our company provides for deliverables. So you have 150 plus pages of slides, right? Whereas in this example, our deliverables here were 9, right? So a little bit different, but the similar content, just a different approach to it. So, and I'm not saying that we're doing the right thing, but it's right for us. So that's probably one thing you'll find as you go through the course and you're dealing with this template file, and it's quite a rich resource to have. You're probably going to find at the end, if you're going to utilize some of this for your work, for others, that you want to pare it down a little bit, because I don't think you could go through and provide 150 plus design sheets at a reasonable cost. It would be quite extreme, the amount of labor.
You'd mentioned maybe last call about the program that you use. Is that what you're using for all of these, for this whole project?
Yeah, we use Vectorworks Landmark, and I can in the chat here. And while it's a great software, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone. So why is that? Well, let's just stop share here, and I will go back. It's a very powerful program, and I started using this 28 years ago. Like, I just very, very fortunate I picked the right one for us. It does site models, it does, all this 3D work, all very powerful stuff. You can do a solar animation. It is very powerful. It does these section drawings easily. It's great, but it takes a powerful computer. It takes quite a bit of training, probably take you a year of work to get, feeling pretty comfy with it. I've used it for a long time. I feel pretty fluent on it for what I do, but there are parts of the software that I've never really dove into. I didn't need to at all, but I use 3D quite a bit, especially if we're doing retaining walls and we have different levels that we're concerned with. You can get your contour information and create a site model, and then build your landscape and see if it fits, right? So it's really useful in that regard, but it takes a powerful computer, and it costs a lot of money, but you can get a free trial. But again, it takes quite a bit of training, and but I think all of these softwares do. Now the exception to that, and I know I've probably shown you this one already, but Morpheo Trace, if you have an iPad, this is a great beginner. You know, I know people that use this for their design work, and that's all they use, and that's great. It's got limitations, but it'll create a scaled drawing for you, and yeah, it's you know, it has lovely graphics, right? Because that's the one thing about design. It has these two components, right? We have our ideas, and then we have the graphical end to articulate the ideas. So the nicer the graphics can potentially be, the easier it is for you to get your ideas across. So this is a wonderful stepping stone in the design process. It's like $35 a year. That's in Canada, so it would be less in the US. But you need an app. Well, sorry, you need an iPad and the iPencil to run it. But we have it on our iPad, and I play with it a little bit. I don't use it for design work, but it's very, very useful. And then there's lots of tutorials online that are free. So, you know, it's a great place to start. And I think if somebody, you know, there's definite limitations. Like you couldn't easily, we used to do quite a bit of commercial landscape design. So we would have to trade files with, you know, civil engineers and architects. And this software wouldn't be ideal for that. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. It does have its limitations, but it's again a great place to start, and low overhead. So the other way, you know, we had to get, you know, I don't know, we spent probably 8,000 or 9,000 on our computer, and then the softwares, you know, we're on an annual plan with them, but to buy the software initially, I'm sure it's $4,000, $3,000. It's a lot. So if you're designing all the time, no problem. But for part-time or when you're starting, this is going to give you lots of really good results. And that's what I would recommend people do. If they have an iPad already, then it's a really low cost way to start. So not quite as exciting as Vectorworks, but a huge price difference. We don't just use that either. We use QGIS, which is an open source software where we're taking LiDAR data and generating different outputs from that. So contour data and slope analysis, and you can do water flow analysis. So it's very useful for larger properties. And then another one called, what's it called? We don't use it very much. It's just the first step of our LiDAR process here. Cloud Compare, there you go. That's the other one. So if you're on a Mac, you need to have Cloud Compare before you have QGIS. So it gets pretty nerdy. So, you know, some people just focus on this and love it. And I love it because it's been a really powerful tool for us. But yeah, so hopefully that answered your question, Andrea. So one thing, do we have any questions at all about the sector compass? Because I know Elsa has a question here that she wants to chat about. But if anybody does, no problem. You can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Totally up to you. Okay, Elsa, do you have your...
Well, maybe one, and that's at what point do you decide to do a large section of your property? Like what's the, I wasn't sure, maybe I missed it, but I mean, I get it if you have 100 acre property, but we have 10 acres, so probably similar
Mhm.
to your own homestead. Like, is it necessary to do a large section of the building area?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Let me just show you an example of I'll try to find an example here for you. Okay. So with your base map, regardless of your property size, it could be 1,000 hectares, or it could be 1 acre, or in this case, this is about 7 acres. And if we ignore the fact this is a sector map, we want to include on their base map, we want to include the whole project site with the property boundaries. And sometimes, as in this case, we've included the roadways, so we have access. I haven't included, and I've even included the neighboring house here with their driveway. So we want that big picture. Now, as we get into the design process, we may, for instance, with this job, we had a water design that we did where we zoomed in a little bit. I can't find it right now, sorry. But yeah, so base plan is always the whole. And then as we go through, when we're looking at various elements that we're trying to put into our design, we may be zooming in on one area specifically and ignore the others. Because in this case, this is 7 acres, and you know, our design is really only going to apply to a couple acres.
Mhm.
Yeah, we had a 100-acre organic farm we did a design for, but it actually had nothing to do with the production end of it. It was more to do with this, 2 or 3 acres that were sort of almost like a park-like space that our client wanted. And so, yeah, you seldom on big acreage are going to be dealing with everything, but you want to show that in your base plan. So hopefully that's clear. Is that
Yeah, thank you.
okay? Do you have any other questions about your base plan at
Yeah.
all, or that was the biggie?
Yeah, that was the big one because
Okay.
of the location of our house. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Andrea, you have 80 acres, isn't it? Or your project site is 80 acres. Yeah.
Yeah, the project site is 80 acres.
Yeah. So
But I have
that's
to figure out how I'm probably gonna have different different zones within the bigger whole.
Yeah. And on see if I can find an example here, but one of the yeah, I'll try and find a few drawings that are examples for you, Andrea, for next our next meeting. But we do what are called viewports. So we'll have a larger site, and then we will be designing in a specific spot there. And luckily, Vectorworks, we can just dial into that, and it'll project that onto a design sheet like this, like you're seeing here. This is there's 2 parts to Vectorworks. There's the design layers, and then there's sheet layers. So this is a sheet layer, and it's just showing us the graphics. But if we go back and we're in that design making changes, it'll update it on the sheet.
That's how Revit works as well, with
Right
sheets
on.
and viewports, and bring
Yeah.
in into scale based on what it is.
Yeah, very handy. Especially if you have to ever do without it and you're trying to scale everything. So yeah. that covers that. I'm going to have to make sure I go right at 10. I have another meeting here, but we've got a few minutes left. So looks like Micah had to go early. All righty. And yeah, is there anything anybody wishes to discuss in the last few minutes?
You were talking about the agrarian or regrarian on my reviews, which is really helpful. I've been looking at that when I get the chance. I'll probably dig more into it after this class. But it sounds like it's an agricultural based process. And so that's very helpful. So I haven't had a chance quite yet, but would you mind maybe talking about it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Let me just bring it up. And yeah, I've been, where are we? There we are. Okay. This is the training platform for the agrarians, and it is got 10 distinct layers, and it's a large agricultural design protocol. But the reality is you can, you know, between permaculture and this and any other design protocols that you have learned in your days, you know, we've kind of integrated or fused a lot of the nuggets from this into our work. So when I'm doing farm design, we'll use all 10 layers here, and they're very distinct, and they're very thorough. So the beginning of the design going through climate, and then geography. These are two enormous design layers. Like geography includes so much. It's quite something. And I've been in this sort of training mode with them for probably 3 years, and I'm going to have to stop my planner subscription at some point, because it's, I don't know, 100 and I think it's 100 US a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but you can join as I can't remember what the membership stages are, but for $10 you can get in and get access to part of this. But the planner membership is where the courses are run, right? So right now they're running a course. I think they're on. We're getting on to water now, and Darren Doherty, who developed the system, he puts on Q&As, and he'll go through, and they're great. I don't often get a chance to sit in on them, but they record them and you can review them, and it's pretty amazing his experience and how he approaches. And we get into buildings. I mean, it's a very rich. You could spend the rest of your life studying this design protocol and you still wouldn't know it all. It's quite something. And then you can take the protocol, expand out with it, or you can shrink it up a little bit. So it's wonderful. It fills a lot of gaps that the permaculture design process will leave, as I'm sure you'll see if you're interested in agriculture and having productive land base. When you get to the end of the course, you'll probably have some questions like, well, what about this and that? And Darren used to teach PDCs in his early years, and he developed this because he was active in farming, and it's all based from the P.A. Yeoman scale of permanence. So if you look at that, which we can do, I got 4 minutes left here. There we go. So that's where that whole design protocol came out of, was the scale of permanence. So it's very easy. These outline layers take more time and energy to modify. So you could say, well, humans have affected their climate, which we seem to, but it has taken many, many years for us to achieve that, right? Whereas if we want to make changes to our soil, we can do that pretty quick. We could build 30 centimeters or a foot of topsoil in a couple of years. If we want to raise or lower the temperature, you know, we're probably looking at more thousands of years. So, and then there's everything in between here. So you have land form or land shape, and then water, how water moves across your landscape. So again, that's an example. Imagine you have some riparian area, and if you wanted to change that, that would be a tremendous effort to do so. So these are all prioritized from the hardest to the easiest. And hence, when you're starting this design system, you start with climate because you're not likely to change that. So you're going to have to go with that. And then geography, well, geography is really documenting all sorts of different aspects about your site. And the one beautiful thing about this training, being in the planners membership, is you get access to this knowledge base. So I didn't know how to use QGIS, but there's an online video program here. So it's all split up. If I'm importing LiDAR data, I can go watch a video on how to do that. It's incredible. So you can really, because that's one thing with QGIS, it is not intuitive. It's very difficult. So yeah, so there's a lot of good things about you know, every class. Here's my remarks on the agrarian platform. And if I was a young farmer, I would definitely be focusing on this to try and maximize the performance of the land I was on. But
Thank you. Yeah, that looks really good.
yeah,
I'll have to pass it on to my cousin and my brother because they're the lead takeover farmers. So
yeah.
they don't really listen to me very much.
Well, they would, I'm sure they'd love it. There's a huge network. If you go on to even just climate, you know, there's 5,000 people in that group, and most of them are all farmers. A lot of them in the US, Central and South America, and Europe, and Australia, and Asia. And there's the odd person like me that's a designer. I'm not a farmer. But it's pretty incredible group of people, and there's a lot of really active members, so highly recommend it.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, no problem. I'm going to have to move along here, and thank you all very much for your participation today. And yeah, I look forward to seeing your sector compasses as we hit next week. And if you run into any trouble, just drop me a note and we'll point you in the right direction. So yeah, you take care, everybody, and have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.